Hello, friends. Good evening. It is Sunday. It is the 15th day of our Zen Happiness Project together. We are starting our last live video stream here. Love for anybody who's here to go ahead and just check in the chat function and let us know who you are and where you're from. I'd love to hear how your practice has been going this week. If you've been able to meditate, if you have any immediate reactions to the mindfulness activities that we engaged in over these last 7 days, I'd love to hear about that too. So any and all comments are certainly welcomed. We're going to get up and running here in just a second. I'm just going to set up my second computer, so give me 30 seconds. I just want to make sure I can see your comments while you're talking here. Okay, hello. I'm getting a message here that we might not be getting video. Okay, let me just double check to see if there's something that I'm doing. No, looks like we're okay. Wonderful. So, let's see. What do we got here? Beautiful. So this past week, we focused on bringing mindfulness into our day-to-day life, right? And we talked about that in the context of being about stress reduction. We talked about it being seeing our meditation in motion. And we started talking about how this was the actualization of taking this idea, this concept of practice, that what we do when we sit and we're meditating in the morning or at night on our comfy cushion in our quiet room with our incense burning and our candle lit, that's practice for how we want to engage in the world, how we want to be in the world, and our day-to-day life, right? So these mindfulness activities are really intentionally selected to start helping us work in that space, right? So if you're like me, it's very easy to be missing your life, right? We go around hurry from project to project. We try and fail at multitasking, right? We jump from one task to the next to the next. We're thinking about the meeting that we have to run to. We've got the to-do list running through our head. Maybe we're sitting at a meeting and we're checking emails on our phone, right? We're missing our life when we do that. One of the best things that's happened for me, especially as it relates to my work life because of a meditation practice, is I no longer try to multitask. I single task, right? I try to make myself fully and completely present with the task that's on hand, right? And when I do that, I find that I'm more productive, I'm more efficient, right? The work that comes out tends to be of a little bit better of caliber. So I only have to do things once. I don't have to do them over and over again. I'm less prone to make mistakes. One of the ways that you can tell that a meditation practice has started to take hold in your life is that you find yourself making less mistakes in day-to-day life. We're less likely to trip over things if we're mindfully walking. We're less likely to swear at somebody or say something inappropriate if we're being mindful about our language. Right? If we're mindfully listening, we're less likely to make a mistake and miss what somebody's saying or talk over them. Right? If we're mindfully driving, we're probably a little less likely to cut somebody off on the road. So this mindfulness, this idea of sort of always being present, fully awakened to our life, is really a multifaceted and very versatile practice. And I think one that has great benefits. So what I'd like to do here is just check in. I got a few questions over the course of the week. It looks like Barry and Marty are having trouble hearing and seeing. But AJ can see us. Hello, AJ. How are you? AJ, I don't know if it would feel like a Zen Happiness Project session if you weren't here. I'm convinced that this would somehow be incomplete if you weren't on the line. I've been thinking a little bit, not to get distracted, I know there's others here. I've been thinking a little bit about our retreat, and I've got a few ideas, so I need to touch base with you by email. I've got a little bit of a busy day tomorrow, but hopefully by Tuesday I'll connect with you. Looking forward to that. Della has video but no audio. Interesting. Della, my recommendation, well, you can't hear this. I'm going to type a response. Reloading. I'm going to see if she can reload the page. Okay. Mindfulness, right? Starts to come into our life. You know, I have to say, just a little observation. I do feel a bit like this 21-day program's rushed, right? If we start developing a daily meditation practice, if we start sitting for 5, 10, 15, even 20 minutes a day, or even if we're just working in the space of getting it done and doing, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes a day, whatever the amount of time is that we enter into this daily practice, we start seeing ourselves become more mindful just by nature, right? And it comes back to this word of practice. We are practicing when we engage in meditation with the kind of awareness and presence that we want to bring into our day-to-day life, right? So in week 2, we start, saying, I'm going to mindfully brush my teeth. I'm going to mindfully walk. I'm going to mindfully engage in this listening exercise. And that's wonderful. And it's important. And it's good to focus on those tasks. But we will also see this happen more naturally, right? We pick up on all kinds of subtle cues that the practice is starting to take hold in our life, right? We're sitting at a red light and we're not getting anxious that the light hasn't turned, or we're waiting for an elevator or a doctor's appointment. We're not angry that we're sitting still, right? These are the little ways that we start to see meditation making a difference in our day-to-day life. Maybe we are a little less distracted when we're talking with a coworker or a friend, right? And I would say that those are all pretty natural benefits of our meditation practice taking root in our life. So it looks like Della is on, AJ's on, Barry, Marty, hello. So, there's a few questions that I got over the course of the week that I'd like to just reflect on a little bit here. I got several questions from some of the participants this week about how long to be sitting. And I do think this is an important thing to talk about. And I need to trust that you can have a sophisticated response and that you can trust yourself and your practice in my answer to this. The research says in habit formation that it takes 64 days on average to develop a new habit, something especially that we only engage with once a day, right? So I'd love to hear, for those of you who are in the chat now, just if you could share with the group what success you've had with meditating daily. I'd love to hear, did you get 2 out of 7 days? Did you do 4 out of 7? Who was really lucky and had more than half the days? What roadblocks you had to practicing? I'd love to hear about that. Did you oversleep? Did you just completely forget? Were you too busy? I'd love to hear what some of the challenges were you worked through. Because of the 64 days to establish a daily habit, I really recommend that when we start in our meditation practice, that we absolutely set the bar as low as humanly possible so that we cannot come up with any excuses for not practicing. My logic is, or what I recommend, it goes something along this lines, is that if 10 minutes doesn't feel intimidating to you, if you feel like you could sit and meditate for 10 minutes a day, every day for the next month, cut that in half. Start with 5. Do that for a month before you add any more time on. And again, I think, if you sit one day for 20 minutes, it feels great. If you sit 2 days in a row for 20 minutes, it'll feel wonderful. But the third day, your enthusiasm, your motivation might start to wane, and maybe life gets a little busy and you don't have 20 minutes. And then the fourth day comes, and the fifth and the sixth, and suddenly you've got a whole week and you haven't meditated again. I've worked with hundreds of beginners. I focused my master's research on this stuff. Habit formation is so critical, right? That we pick a practice and really stick to it, and we start small. It has to be attainable, right? Because our motivation is very high. We come to practice for a whole variety of reasons. Maybe we're stressed out at work. Maybe we're done with having a temper. Maybe we're overweight and we want to learn some self-control and discipline that'll help us with our impulse control, right? Whatever the motivation, grief, misery, boredom, career change, right? When you start a practice, your motivation is very high, right? So you can take on a lot, right? But inevitably, that crisis fades, right? And our enthusiasm wanes. And when we lose that motivation, we have to make sure we haven't set too high of a bar for ourselves, right? The other thing I'll say about just a tip for habit formation is linking a new habit to an existing habit. So, for example, I get out of bed, my alarm goes off, I jump in the shower, I brush my teeth, I sit down and I meditate. I shower every single day, I brush my teeth every morning, and then I meditate, right? Now I actually add things to my meditation because it's such an entrenched habit that I can rely on that I can build other habits like them on top of that. I remind myself, right? I put alerts on my phone, Post-it notes on my toothbrush. New habits are hard. There's a reason we don't all come around to January 1st and say, oh, I'm going to lose 20 pounds this year, and we're not all a whole bunch skinnier in February, right? We all have really good intentions, and yet it's very challenging to start this new habit, right? So set the bar low. Now, the second half of this is, I think the hope is to work up to 20 to 30 minutes a day. If you really want Zen meditation to take hold in your life, if you really want to feel the full effects, getting to a point where you can sit for 20 to 30 minutes is optimal. I think that's many of my practitioner friends, people who've been meditating for a long time, I'd say the majority of them fall into the 20 to 30 minutes, right? There's something that happens to the brain after about 10, 15 minutes of meditating, that the discursive thoughts, those sort of surface bubbling thoughts, those just like the nagging, the to-do list, the displeased with how warm it is in the room, or my shoulders are tight, or that sort of trivial stuff that we first deal with in meditation. That stuff tends to die down after about 10 or 15 minutes, and we start to get into a much more settled place. We know that physiologically, that after about 15 minutes, our heart rate has really settled and plateaued, that our metabolism starts to slow down, that our blood pressure is lowered, right? Everything after that, there's diminishing returns. So sitting 30 minutes isn't that much better than sitting 20 minutes, but sitting 20 minutes is dramatically better than sitting 10. Sitting 10 is a lot better than sitting 5, and obviously 5 minutes is infinitely better than 0, right? So I think we're looking to work our way up to a daily meditation practice that lasts for 20 to 30 minutes. But we have to do that in a way that first ensures that we're actually meditating, right? So first things first, build the foundation, commit to that. Say for the next 2 months, I'm going to start with 5 minutes every day, then I'm going to build up to 10 minutes. Maybe if you're feeling ambitious, instead of adding, going to 15 or 20, you want to add another 10 minutes later on in the day. Maybe you have a morning and an evening practice now, right? I would work in the first few months in that space. But in the back of your mind, I would recognize that for a lot of practitioners who really settle into a daily practice, they shoot for this 20 to 30 minute mark. Right? I'll take this one step further. And I talk about this when we close out the end of this third week about next steps. But something worth mentioning while we're on the topic of length, meditation retreats are incredibly valuable, right? I use this analogy that I have a bad lower back. I go to see a chiropractor regularly. I have some stretching exercises that I do every day. And I try to reach down and touch my toes. And I'm about this far away on an average day from touching my toes, right? And I stretch for 5, 6, 7 minutes. I'm supposed to stretch for 20, but 20 minutes of stretching really isn't in my busy schedule these days. When I go to see the chiropractor, I spend an hour with her, and we spend about 20 minutes of that time stretching, and she stretches me pretty vigorously. She leans into it. I've got my leg up over my shoulder. We go through a couple of repetitions of that. The next day, I'm all the way able to reach over and touch my toes, right? A meditation retreat is very much like that. When we set aside a day, a weekend, or a week for a silent meditation retreat, what we're doing is we're really deeply stretching our practice. And when we return, we find that we get back to that still place a little more naturally. We find that stillness a little more quickly. But over time, the effects of that retreat wear off. In the same way that 3 or 4 days after I've gone to my chiropractor, again, I'm this far away from touching my toes, right? So build that foundation. Meditate for 5 to 10 minutes every single day. Work your way up over the course of a couple of months to 20 to 30 minutes a day if the practice really takes hold. And then find a way to, every couple of months or once a year, to work a retreat into your life. And you'll find real great growth that way. So that's kind of, I just thought I got enough questions about that over the course of the week that I wanted to address it in this session. Is the length of time really is dependent on how successful you've been in establishing that daily habit. I did have a few interesting conversations with folks about really difficult emotions that come up when we're practicing. I want to talk about this with the group too. This is not a bad thing, right? One of the things that's so valuable about our meditation practice is we create a soft, open, spacious place where we can start working through some real challenging issues. And just for simplicity's sake, to move through the course of this conversation efficiently, I'll sort of give 2 examples, right? Some of us come to practice because we're in the middle of a crisis. Grief is very common. I meet a lot of folks who are entering hospice care and they're dealing with the last days of their life. I have people who show up that they experienced the loss of a loved one recently, crisis, tragedy, losses of jobs, divorces, very typical conversations for a lot of the beginners who I meet in meditation. This can be the most challenging, but also can be an incredibly fruitful way to start a meditation practice. I know for me that after the loss of loved ones, sitting felt incredibly painful. And I was hoping that there would be some kind of escape there. But I would get to the meditation cushion and I would immediately be confronted with that loss. And if you go back to our introduction, if you remember in week 1 what we talked about, meditation, especially Zazen, is about awakening to our life. It's not about escaping. It's not about running away, right? We're really going to be present for this stuff. And so that might not sound comforting when we're dealing with grief or sadness or tragedy or some kind of emergency. But the comfort comes in the fact that it's through this, through facing our issues, through sitting with them, through working through that and processing that, especially in the context of the safe place of a meditation practice, that we really can find resolution. We can make our peace with these difficult times. So to sort of summarize that, When we're in crisis and we come to practice, I think we have to be a little realistic about what our expectations are, right? It's going to be hard to sit and meditate. We're going to be confronted with that loss, right? But we're going to be gentle. We're going to practice some acceptance. We're going to be patient with ourselves. Grief takes a long time to process. I mean, everybody's grief process and each instance of grief is unique and different and complex. We bounce from stage to stage. We have periods of an absence of feelings. We have periods of great anger. And usually after the immediate, if we have a loss in the family, we have this big rush of family and friends sort of compiling in. They're very supportive and they cook food for you and you take some time off work. But 2-3 weeks later, people have kind of forgotten about your tragedy and expect you to be functioning in society. And we're only starting to scratch the surface on that processing. So recognizing that this takes time and it's normal, I think is really an important part of that process. But our practice is a safe place to feel those emotions. We're not going to die because of sadness. We're not going to die because of anxiety, right? We can sit with some of these things. So that's the first example. The second example of sort of difficulty that we encounter when we're meditating is for stuff that's a little more deeply rooted. And going back again to part of the advantage of sitting for a little longer than 10 minutes is part of what we start to see is we start to access our subconscious. We start seeing the character and real nature of some of our thinking, right? So once you're done with, oh, okay, my back is sore. Oh, I'm still tired. I haven't woken up yet. Oh, the neighbor's dog is barking. Is never going to stop barking. Once we get through letting go of those kind of thoughts and really settling into our breath, the stuff that we start seeing percolate up and bubble up in our meditation practice tends to be, not always, there's no rules to this, by the way, but it tends to be stuff that's a little bit more deeply rooted in the way that we process or think about the world or the way that we're conditioned, right? Some of the bigger issues. We were just doing a loving kindness meditation workshop, and one of the questions we got was from somebody who talked about having difficulty extending this loving kindness practice to himself, right? And I was reflecting a little bit on my experience of really struggling for years with low self-esteem, and how it was only after a couple of years of living this healthy and balanced life that was really dedicated to service to others that my self-esteem caught up with the wonderful and positive actions that I was putting into my life, right? I had been acting like a pretty good person for a long time before I started feeling like a good person, right? But I used to see that in my meditation practice, I'd be 20, 30 minutes in, or I'd be in a meditation retreat, and I'd really be creating some space for my practice. And I would start seeing this deeply rooted, very critical voice. Actually, the clearest example that comes to me is I was doing one of these 21-day introductions about a year and a half ago. When I started them, I used to do them one-on-one by Skype with people who were participating in it. And I was going into the second or third week with somebody, and I asked if she wanted a guided meditation or if she wanted to meditate silently with me. She said, why don't we do some silent meditation? To which I said, oh, thank God, I hate the sound of my voice. And I rang the bell and I sat there and I meditated for 10 minutes. And I was like, wow, that was a really awful thing to say about myself. I would never say to another human being, hi, your voice, it's terrible, right? But I would say about myself very readily, oh, I hate the sound of my own voice. I mean, I still experience it. Sometimes I watch some of these videos afterwards and I'm like, oh, the sound of my own voice. It's challenging to listen to, right? A meditation practice allows me to see those kind of habitual ways of thinking. So some of that deeply seated stuff that I need to really uproot and let go of. Right. And so that example is really positive for me because I rang the bell, sat there in meditation, and thought about how I needed to start using more loving and supportive words when I talked about myself. And so maybe I have a unique voice, whatever. I love and accept all of my friends and family who have different and unique voices. I know that they love and accept me. Why do I get to use such hateful and harmful language when talking about myself? It's just one example, right? But the advantage of sitting for a little while and creating the space is that you start, that's the kind of stuff that we start processing. That's where when we see that stuff come up time and time again, we start to learn about ourselves and some of the things that we need to work on a longer time frame in our life. So those were the two big things I got in the questions. I'd love to hear from AJ, Barry, Marty, Della, anybody else who's on the chat here. If you have any questions at this point about the first 2 weeks, and then I'll start getting into the introduction for what week 3 is going to be like. I got some nice feedback here. Marty and Barry had 4 out of 7 and 5 out of 7 days of meditation. That's great. Barry, I'd love to hear what you thought worked for you. Like, how did you get to 5 out of 7? I think for somebody going into their second week of the meditation practice here, that's a pretty successful number. So if you have any tips, anything you found really clicked for you, I'd love to hear what worked there. AJ said she only missed a couple days. She fell asleep because she usually meditates later in the day. AJ, absolutely. So I've said this a couple times, so forgive me if I'm repeating for you here, but a few things about this. One, we learn a lot about ourselves when we're meditating. And sometimes what we learn is that we're part of the 60% of Americans who are sleep deprived. And sometimes, we just need to go to sleep. And so I do this a lot in my morning meditation practice where I give myself a little while, right? I brush my teeth, I shower, I go and I sit, and I don't immediately give up if I'm tired. But after 10, 15, 20 minutes, if I'm still sleepy and really struggling to stay awake there on the cushion, that's my body telling me I need to go to sleep. And my practice for that day is to go back to bed, give my body the rest that it needs to carry on for the rest of the day. The other thing I'll say about sleepiness when we're meditating, this is part of the advantage of meditating with our eyes slightly open, right? If we're just sort of half focused on the ground, we're letting a little bit of light in. If that's not enough, you can open your eyes all the way. Again, we just try to keep our eyes softly focused a couple feet in front of us. We're not trying to create visual stimulation here, but a little extra light coming in can help keep us awake. We can also, if we're tired, we can shorten the length of time that we're sitting, right? If we normally sit for 10 minutes and we're feeling really tired, 3 minutes could be enough. You could meditate as you're laying down and closing your eyes. You could follow your breath and just count your breath as you're on your way to sleep, right? We don't always have to do formal practice at the meditation cushion. AJ asks, you said emotions tend to come out during meditation. Is this something you've experienced? So yes. I would say yes, absolutely, but not always. There's no predicting what's going to happen, right? I don't want to get too sort of philosophical about this, but there's a very interesting lesson in the fact that when we sit for a while and you discover that it's not my will that's creating this stream of consciousness, these thoughts that come burbling up. I have no idea where they come from. They just come from somewhere. And my emotions are usually a little more obvious. They're usually in response or reaction to something, but sometimes I just have emotions that aren't linked to anything either, right? And there's a real powerlessness in that experience of seeing that we don't have sort of original control over our thoughts and feelings. So that got a little away from answering your question, right? But so yes, I tend to have emotions and see emotions. There's a lot of Buddhist thought and philosophy that it's impossible to have sense perception without having some layer of emotion attached to that, right? The part of why learning these sharp observational skills through Zazen is so important, so we can start to parse some of that out. Here's here's sense perception, here's the sense emotional response, right? We start to be able to break those things out. We see that we judge everything as positive or negative or neutral. We don't really just observe, we don't just see, we see and judge, right? So there tends to always be emotions attached to things, but they don't necessarily tend to be big emotions. But I would absolutely say that before I started meditating regularly, I've always been in therapy. I've been in therapy since I was about 14 years old. And one of the things my therapists have, a number of therapists have said to me over the course of the years, I was pretty good at expressing what I think and not necessarily as good about expressing what I feel. And meditation practice has really enabled me to get in touch with what I feel, right? Very aware too of how I feel those emotions in my body, but also being better able to articulate those and make sense of it. Right? I used to, when I'd have a strong emotion, it was almost like there was overload and I couldn't communicate about it or separate myself from it. And now, as a regular meditator, I see emotions arising in me. I can choose to engage with them or not. I get to pick and choose. You know, if it's anger, I try to let it go. If it's joy, I try to work with it and cherish it a little bit more. Let's see. Barry responded to my question here. He said that he found that he chose the same time each day. He works from home, and each morning after he organized what he needed to do, he took a break and meditated. That's great, right? So, A, structure. Right. B, you had some time and space to yourself, right? So there's not distractions. Really great. And C, you have like a routine and you have this plugged in at a very particular point. So I love that. So one more time, Barry says he chose the same time each day. He works from home. Each morning after he organized what he needed to do, he took a break and meditated. That's just classic. You know, I find that for myself, I meditate on average, I'd say like 5.5 to 6 days out of 7. And it's almost always Saturday and Sunday that I get off track. This morning I ran out to the skydiving into the drop zone, right? And so I was up and out much earlier into the car. I didn't meditate until I got out to the drop zone and I was waiting to go skydiving, right? Normally, shower, brush my teeth, sit and meditate, which I did yesterday on Saturday, but not today on Sunday. I will do that every single day this week because my work week is very predictable. So I find Monday to Fridays to be very successful days for meditation. So it's a little after 7:30. So I'd like to, unless there are any other questions, which you're welcome to chime in there on the chat. If you're on mobile and you can't chat with us, if you have any questions, you could email them in response to the email that I just sent out that says there are 7 minutes left to practice. If you reply to that, I'll check in a couple of minutes and see if there are any questions by email, which I'll respond to then. We got a comment from Dusty, my friend Dusty. Dusty just led, for anybody who wasn't here, Dusty just led an amazing workshop. It was a loving kindness, a meta meditation workshop. It was just absolutely wonderful. The link will be in the Facebook page. It's already there. I'll put it up on the blog. It'll probably be in some of the emails this week. But absolutely, if you have an hour, I check it out. She did a great job, led a really wonderful talk. And a loving kindness meditation is a really wonderful way to transform the way that we think and feel about some of the people in our life. So thank you, Dusty. So Dusty says here, I try to pay attention to the thoughts or emotions during practice because I would like to analyze those to figure out any patterns. What are your thoughts on keeping a notebook to jot down thoughts? So Dusty, I think it's a really good question. And I want to give kind of a nuanced answer. I think one of the things that I say to a lot of my friends who I've meet through the introduction course that we do, the monthly beginners course at the Zen Happiness Project, is that most of the people that I do beginners instruction with who end up sticking with the daily meditation practice, I'd say 4 out of 5 end up with a practice different than Zazen, right? And I think it's really valuable to start with one place and to stick with the practice for 2 or 3 months, or even at least 30 days, just so that you get a real sense of the practice and you get fine-tuned to the subtlety of it. But we very quickly have to move on to things that work for us. It has to be pragmatic and practical, right? So in Zazen, we're spending a little less time. We're not really thinking about or analyzing or working with emotions unless they're really difficult things that we can't just recognize and let go of and return to our breath, right? In Zazen, we're really building concentration as a practice. If we get into a little bit more spacious of a place because we have an emotion that just keeps arising and arising over and over, that's our body and mind telling us that we need to deal with this a little bit, that it can't be ignored. Then we try to sit and use that thought or feeling as the anchor to our practice and try to use that spaciousness as a way of processing what's happening there. But all along the way, looking to let go of that and return to this ability to be completely calm, centered, and focused, right? So Charlotte Joko Beck is one of my favorite Zen teachers. She's dead about 2 years now. She wrote a wonderful book called Everyday Zen and was the founder of San Diego Zen Center. And she said that in Zazen, it's not so much that we let go of thoughts, it's that we wear them out. And I really like that. That captures, right? What we find is our thought life is consumed usually by a pretty short list of things that we hit on over and over and over again. They become familiar. By witnessing and observing the meditation practice over the course of months and years, we start to have a thought, and it's almost like, oh, here's this one again. This one's all about how the boss doesn't appreciate the work I do, and I need a new, blah, 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 right? Whatever the song dance is, right? We sort of tire ourselves out from having the same thoughts over and over. A Vipassana practice, sometimes called insight meditation, really sometimes confused with mindfulness meditation, which is similar but not the same. Vipassana is a little more intentional about working with our emotions. It observes them, it labels them, maybe spends a little more time experiencing them and then lets them go and returns to the breath, right? So where Zazen says, I'm thinking about working on, let it go, right back to the breath, trying to build this laser-like, concentration. Vipassana is a little bit slower and more open. It says, oh, this is a thought about work. This is thought about pride or insecurity or feelings of inadequacy. I have those a lot. Okay. I need to extend myself some love and remind myself that I'm worthy of a job, and I'm going to keep trying hard at work, and it's okay to, my effort counts, not the end results, and then let go of the thoughts and return back to the breath, right? So subtle differences, but different ways of working with the practice. So I'm not a Vipassana expert. So you really would need to seek counsel on keeping a journal for Vipassana practice from an insight meditation instructor. But the Zazen answer, the Zen meditation answer, would be to not use the notebook. That maybe when we were done meditating, we could journal for a while and say, put our thoughts to pen to paper there. And really in Zen, the reason for that in Zazen is that we're trying to, we start with this idea of physical stillness as being a prerequisite for mental stillness, right? And if we're trying to develop concentration, taking a pen and paper out and starting to write and forming our thoughts is disruptive, right? Now, that said, I've posted about this a couple of times. I think I have a blog post. If you Google Sheila's tip for clearing the mind in the Zen Happiness blog, My friend Sheila spends some time when she's got a really busy mind. She sits down and she journals for a while, like 5 or 10 minutes, and then sits and meditates for 5 or 10 minutes. She finds that a way of clearing the mind. You could flip that practice and say, I'm going to sit for 5 or 10 minutes and really calm my mind and start seeing what the character of what's up there, and then journal, right? And again, at the end of the day, you can ignore all the traditions and you can do what works for you, right? And I think that's probably the best answer at the end of the day is really, what does my practice need? What is the best expression of living my life fully and authentically look like today? How do I practice living my life, right? And then follow that impulse. So yeah, that was probably a longer answer than you were expecting, but again, very pragmatic, I think, is the last answer. So it all has to do with what your end goal is and what you hope to get out of your practice. So let's just talk a little bit about this upcoming week. I don't want to belabor it too much because I think this week really speaks for itself once we get into the exercises. I love this week. And the feedback I get from this third week is this is either people's favorite part of the 3 weeks or their least favorite part. And I have a bias. I think the people who actually do the exercises that we recommend over the course of the next 7 days love this week. And the people who read the exercises but don't do it don't find it to be very meaningful. I think there's a real theme here, right, through the course of the 21-day program, right? We get out of this program what we put into it. And this is really a program of action, right? We only get these results if we do it. Reading about meditation, thinking about meditation, all very nice. They're just distracting thoughts, right? Doing meditation is the only way that you start to still the mind, quiet the mind, and get a little bit of a taste of that serenity. The same with these exercises this upcoming week. These are practices. These are 6 examples of deliberate and thoughtful actions that we can take that create joy in the lives of others and ourselves, right? And I'm really deliberate about the emphasis there, that this is about creating joy in the lives of others and ourselves, because I think that's really deeply connected to happiness, right? Hedonism doesn't work. It does in the short term. It feels great for me to eat a cheese pizza. I love eating a large cheese pizza, just gorging myself. It feels good for about 5 minutes until I'm disgustingly full, and I regret it for the couple hours later, and the next day I got on the scale and I'm heavier, and then I have to diet for 3 days just to recover from having eaten a large cheese pizza, right? Hedonism feels good in the moment and has a crummy hangover afterwards, right? But every time that I take an action that's helpful, that generates joy and well-being in the life of somebody else, I also experience that joy and well-being, and I get to carry that on into the days in the future. There's no hangover from doing good for somebody else, right? And I do want to tie this just a little bit to something that I think is forgotten about the life story of the Buddha. So if you're familiar with Siddhartha's story, if you read Siddhartha in high school, for example, or if you've read any Buddhist literature, you're probably familiar that the Buddha was originally a prince, and he lived a luxurious life. His father had received a prophecy when he was born that he would either be a great spiritual king or a great warrior king. And the father really wanted him to be a warrior king, so he wanted him to feel the joys that came with excess and conquering and being rich, right? So he had numerous wives, and they had parties every night, and he had everything he could ever desire presented to him. And when Siddhartha was about 25, 26 years old, he wandered out into the town. He saw somebody being born, a baby being born, somebody growing old, somebody sick, and somebody dying. And seeing these four phases of suffering was the beginning of the Buddha's path. It talked about sort of his existential angst, right? And he went off and he became a yogi, and he found that the Vedic tradition wasn't satisfying, and then he found this middle way and spent 8 days under the Bodhi tree and was enlightened. A lot of us in the States, especially because we focus on meditation as a tool for self-help, we really focus on the part of the story where the Buddha sees all this suffering in the world, and he says, oh, how do I answer this challenge of suffering in my life? How do I free myself from suffering? But that's one-sided. Part of the Buddha's experience when he went out into the town was the anguish that came from sympathizing with somebody who was suffering. The Buddha talked very explicitly about delivering all sentient beings, himself, but everybody else as well, from suffering, right? So the Buddha's path starts with ourselves because it's the only place we have 100% control, right? But really is actualized when we start realizing well-being and goodness in the lives of others, and start being a little more thoughtful about how we live in the world. So for me, it's an important part of the story that's not told, and I just wanted to highlight that for a second. But I also know from my personal life, because of the family I was raised in, that volunteering, being a service to others, is one of the greatest joys that we have, right? I really benefited. You know, both my parents worked in nonprofits their whole life. My father started in soup kitchens, then was in education. My mother's parents were missionaries in Africa. My mother was born in Africa and dedicated her whole life. She's now a hospice and hospital chaplain, does run wonderful work. So I grew up in a household where they really cherished and held up these ideals of being a service to others. And what I've discovered through those is really three elements that, if you read any of the literature in psychology about happiness, we need hope, purpose, and hope, purpose, and meaning, right? And one of the things I think is so cool about being a service to somebody is we actualize those three things all in one fell swoop. We give hope to somebody else, which anytime we give something away, we also receive it, right? When we're kind and we offer somebody some kind of kindness. We feel a sense of purpose. We're living a purpose when we're actualizing service, and that generates meaning. You know, I'm very influenced by the existentialist thinkers. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning was a really formative book for me as a young person. This idea that even in bleak and hopeless situations, and Viktor Frankl, wrote that book about his time being in Auschwitz and a Holocaust and the prison camps there, and the death camps, and how he found meaning and purpose even in the face of such bleak times. And a lot of that was about his assessment with some of the prisoners that survived that horrific situation, really shared their last piece of bread with somebody else, tried to give comfort to somebody who was worse off than them, right? We know this about the human spirit. We need hope, we need purpose, and we need meaning. And I think very simply by taking actions that are helpful to other people, we find all three of those in a really quick and convenient way. So you can get into endless debates. Is that really selfish? Is it not? I would argue it's not, but we could have that debate about whether or not that's a selfish action. Another time. I'm happy to engage in that. I just want to check in real quick because I said I would check the emails to see if there's any questions. I have no email questions. Doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat group, but if you have any questions about this week or anything I just said, I would love to hear them before we get wrapped up. But I'll close with that. We learned a lot in the first week about the foundations of meditation, Zazen. We talked a little bit about the habit formation, right? We reemphasized that today, this need to really discipline ourselves and get into the habit here. We're going to create this daily meditation habit. And even if that means we're only going to sit for 30 seconds, a minute, or 3 minutes, it's infinitely more time than zero, right? Then we looked at ways that we can incorporate mindfulness, so we can take meditation into motion into our day-to-day life. And we had these mindfulness exercises, and we started seeing that our whole life could be practice, right? And now we're going to sort of perfect all of that and really bring this mindfulness into actualizing good for others, right? And I think that's kind of the crowning jewel of our exercises here. So I will stay on the chat here in YouTube if there's any questions. If you're watching this recorded and you have any questions after the fact, you can always email me directly at zenhappinessproject@gmail.com. I loved practicing with everybody today, getting to chat about this. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. And I look forward to hearing from you all during the course of this week. Thank you.